Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. A lot of you that watched my initial review of this Tamron 16 to 30mm f2.8 G2 lens for the Nikon Z mount wanted to know what this lens was like for landscape and astrophotography. So while I still had this lens before returning it from the loan from Tamron Australia, I headed out to do a little bit of testing.
Okay, so this is Dolphin Rock, and this is at Point Cartwright in Queensland, Australia. I've got my little Manfrotto tripod, I've got my Nikon Z7, and I've got the Tamron 16 to 30mm f2.8 G2 lens. The tide is coming in pretty quickly, so I'm going to get set up. I'm going to try and get a shot here with the waves coming through. I might even put a filter on the front of the lens and see what type of shots I can get. We're in winter here, and we get this thing called the Belt of Venus happening out on the horizon when it's quite cold, which it is. You get this beautiful purple and pink and blue hue out in the horizon. So that is not too far off, and I'm going to try and get that shot where I've got that Belt of Venus happening in the background, and I'll have this Dolphin Rock in the foreground. So I don't know if you know what the Belt of Venus is. It's actually an atmospheric phenomenon when it's going down at sunset, and it's kind of like a bit of the Earth's shadow gets caught into the atmosphere and it makes all this wonderful colours. Actually, I'm just going to go and get a shot of this because it's looking really good right now. Because that tide is coming in. I'm keeping my eyes on this wave.
So this was my first test shot with this Tamron 16 to 30mm f2.8 G2 lens. Now the Belt of Venus wasn't really that dominant in the background as yet. The shot was taken at 20mm, the shutter speed was at 0.4 of a second, f11 and ISO 64. I'm focusing on that Dolphin Rock. Let's push in and see how sharp it is at that focus mark. Scrolling around, that looks pretty sharp to me, very reminiscent of my Nikon 14 to 30mm f4S lens. On the rock, you can see it looks like it's got an eye for the dolphin, and the definition around that is very clear. You can even make out some barnacles on the rock.
Okay, so I'm set up with my framing. My final settings are ISO 64, f11, and I'm just under 1 second. Let's get the shot. Here we go. Here comes the wave. This is it. Beautiful.
Okay, so I was pretty happy with this shot, and for this one I went wider with the Tamron using 16mm so I could get as much in the frame as possible. I love the water formation and the ghosting as it flows over the rocks in the frame. The Belt of Venus is now really showing in the background horizon, and I love those colors. Again, my focus point was on the Dolphin Rock itself. Pushing in, and the same results as my previous shot. Even with the lower light, I get nice sharp definition right around that rock, and even in the foreground rocks as well, and that's due mainly to that aperture of f11. Very nice indeed, and I didn't have to use filters in the end because the light was dark enough and capture that movement in the waves and water.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic fun with this new Tamron 16 to 30mm f2.8 G2 lens for the Nikon Z mount. There was one particular shot there with that Dolphin Rock where this wave exploded in front of me, and it kind of looks like the dolphin or the Dolphin Rock is coming out of the wave. It's just amazing. All right, so now that Belt of Venus is just starting to disappear in the sky, it's all clear. Now, the great thing is, what timing for Tamron to send me out this lens. It's the new moon tonight, and it's so clear, beautiful clear sky. It's time to do some astro with this lens.
Walking back along the beach that evening, I noticed people had made these wooden structures or sculptures in the sand, and I thought these may come in very handy as foreground subjects for my astro test shots that I'm going to take when it gets darker.
So this afternoon at this beach, I actually found this wooden structure that somebody had built. It was so cool. I pulled out my PhotoPills app and I checked where the Milky Way was coming up. And just so happens the Milky Way was just coming up at a certain place right beside this wooden structure at 6:22 p.m. So I'm going to get set up here. I've got my little tripod, I've got the Nikon Z7 with the Tamron 16 to 30mm f2.8 G2 lens. So I'm going to get a shot of the Milky Way with this structure in the foreground and see how it looks. Right. Just putting my little tripod there. Apologies for the darkness. It is so pitch black here, which is kind of good for astrophotography. But I'll get a shot of this. I'm going to put myself in the shot with my little headlamp, and we're going to see how this looks with this lens.
Okay, so here is how that shot turned out. Now, I've done some very basic alterations like cropping and light exposure to these Astro test shots in post, but I wanted to keep them as raw as possible so you can get an idea of what it's like coming straight out of the camera using this Tamron 16-30 f2.8 G2 lens. The settings I used for this single shot was 20mm on the Tamron. Exposure time was 15 seconds. My aperture was wide open at f2.8 and my ISO was 2500. Also with my white balance, I set it manually in the menu to 4400 Kelvin. I used to use a lower number than that once, but I've found now that using that 4400 temperature, I get a warmer color in my Astro shots, and it seems to balance the shot better to light paint subjects in the foreground. Up in the corners, we can see some nice clear definition in the stars. There is a bit of color noise in this shot, but you can easily fix that in post-processing, as a lot of you would know in Lightroom or Photoshop. Those lights on the horizon, by the way, that you can see are ships actually waiting to come into port. I'm pretty impressed with this lens in its sharpness in the foreground. On that wooden structure in the foreground, it was pretty much black. You couldn't even see it with the naked eye. The definition around that wood is impressive. Now that's not a pretty bad result without using any sort of star tracking gear or multiple layers blended to reduce noise in post-processing.
So with the Z7 and this Tamron lens, I found this, I don't know if you can see, there's just a bit of a dead log in the sand here, and then I've got the Milky Way coming up over the eastern horizon. It's about 7:30. My PhotoPills app told me it was going to be in that position about that time. Now for the settings, I'm going to go for something like a single shot. I'm going to go for ISO 2500, wide open at f2.8. I'm going to go 16mm to begin with. So let's give that a shot.
So I did two shots with this dead tree on the beach. One was at 16mm and the other one was at 20mm. Both turned out pretty much the same, although the 16mm one, I did get that smidge of vignetting up in the corners. The 20mm shot was better in that the vignetting was gone. The settings on these shots were pretty much the same as the last one, only my shutter speed was shorter at 10 seconds. In the last 2 seconds of the exposure, I used my headlamp to light paint the tree in the foreground. Up in the corners of the 16mm to the left, oh look, you can see a little bit of a satellite going through there. Like before, we get some nice definitions in the stars. I used the focus peaking on the Z7 and I focused on the tree in the foreground, and you can see we get some nice detail and sharpness there. Same goes for the 20mm one. Again, I focused on the tree in the foreground and we get some nice definition and sharpness on that tree. So from my test shots, and after using this lens for 2 weeks, I think the Tamron 16-30mm f2.8 G2 lens for the Nikon Z mount offers very good value for the money. It's very diverse in its uses, and if you're on a tighter budget and you can't afford those more expensive native lenses, then this Tamron is worth considering. Well, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your kind support. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.